The main character is at a posh banquet where the assembled aristocrats are cheerfully talking to each other, discussing pressing news. There is a conversation between two beautiful ladies who discuss that recently one of them went to the beach, which is located near her villa, because of which her skin is very badly burned, and she wonders if it is noticeable. And the other aristocrat convinces her that everything is fine and tries to explain that she should not worry about it. But the first girl looks really sad and due to this and explains that this is a really serious matter for her because she is insanely embarrassed that she is attending a party, which is very important to her in such an inappropriate way. The concerned girl pities her, saying she realizes how important it is. But suddenly, the main character enters the conversation, who, looking over the girl from head to toe, convinced that Lady Lilis is absolutely wrong. And her skin today looks like white marble, pretty much the same as usual. After which she smiles brightly and says that even if she were a little tanned, she would continue to look absolutely beautiful because she is a wonderful girl in her own right, and it wouldn't spoil her one bit. Then one of the aristocrats hugs her tightly and does not understand how it happened that Sasha not only speaks like an angel, but also looks like one of them. The protagonist is clearly pleased with such attention. She does not mind such an embrace at all. But then she realizes that she's not the Sasha tart that all these girls are talking about, because she's just turned into this girl. One day when it was a very rainy evening, the protagonist was coming home in the dark. A truck flew into her path at a tremendous speed, and the driver just couldn't react in time to move it off its course. So there was an accident from which the protagonist suffered and eventually died. And by accident, she became one of the supporting characters from a novella she was reading before she was hit by a car. So she was reborn as the character Sasha Tart, that she was mentioned as the belle of the empire. She was indeed beautiful. She had bright, heavenly blue eyes and pink, marshmallow-like hair. She was a heroine who had repeatedly contracted with the Duchess. When a girl first saw herself, she couldn't even believe how she, with such a crazy cute appearance, could be a minor character. And so she thought that since she was so lucky to turn into such a beautiful girl, she should definitely become a flower of this society. But to her dismay, the rest of the aristocrats didn't know her at all or ignored her. Some, as soon as they recognized her name, wanted to know what family she was from. That's when the protagonist realized that in this aristocratic society, title is incredibly important, and their family is literally a pebble under the feet of the other aristocrats, as there were many beautiful girls from more noble families than her. So the protagonist obviously realized that she couldn't survive if things continued in the same way. So after that day, when she realized her true position, she decided to change her behavior. And her motto was to be nice to everyone and to please, as it was an insanely advantageous position in her case. The protagonist does not remember how long it has been since she was ignored, because she just walked in front of the aristocrats and all kinds of pleasing, so it was not difficult for her. She realized that she had to start her show again, which was to act overly cute attached, as well as expressing herself through a cute or a baby voice, facial expressions, and gestures. To the other aristocrats, she was literally like a big pet. Of course, behind her back, the other aristocrats were saying nasty things and informing her that the girl had absolutely no pride. And they did it in such a way that she heard it. Of course, the girl understood everything and heard such things more than once. But she didn't care about that at all, because her main goal was to survive and live a good life. And truth be told, she received a lot of love from influential sons and daughters. So the number of personal connections and invitations to scores kept increasing. But she was suddenly brought out of her thoughts by a young man who smiled and said that all the flowers of the empire had gathered here. The noblewoman who was closest to him greeted His Highness Johanna sweetly, but he smiled brightly and said that she did not need to be formal around him. Then he asked what the girls had been talking about with their beautiful, plump lips. All the aristocrats were madly happy about such a compliment and literally glowed with happiness, telling what their conversation was about before. But the main character clearly did not like it all, and she did not understand such a reaction from the other girls, because the guy did not say anything special and just pleased them. Then she remembered that the novella she was in was called Atlanta's Beloved, and this novella was about an aristocrat from a family unknown to anyone who appears in high society and captivates all the prominent men of the empire. In fact, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy isn't a slacker at all. He's a crown prince who's called the Free Wind of the Empire, a man who ran away from the protagonist without breaking his previous engagement. The main character was annoyed that this guy, even though he was engaged, was still hanging out with other women. So she snuggled up to Lady Ava and thought about the fact that the prince usually acts disgusting and then suddenly pretends to be a pure knight when the protagonist appears, and she didn't like that behavior at all. But suddenly someone's voice suddenly sounded, and a girl approached them. Sasha reacted and looked in her direction and was very surprised at this sudden attention from the mistress. It was Rebecca Van Archen, and it was the villain in this novel. As soon as he saw the beautiful mistress in front of him, Johannes wondered if his beautiful fiancée Rebecca had decided to visit them. But she looked at him carefully with her cold gray eyes and asked His Highness not to call her that in public. She reminded him that it was not the first time they had made such a request. He went up to her and asked her not to say such cruel words, because in fact, she was the most beloved and the only one for him. Then the protagonist remembered that earlier she had decided to avoid the villain of the novel and to be on the heroine's side. Because in any novel, the villain usually can't escape a dangerous situation. And Rebecca, too, gets the most cliched end of a villain. But scrutinized the mistress in front of her Sasha absolutely did not understand why the villainess was so beautiful and how she could stay away from her. At that moment, Johannes put his arm around her shoulders and wondered what had happened to his fiancé, for earlier she had looked only at him. Now her gaze was elsewhere. She looked excitedly at Johannes and asked who the child was, being the main character, and then added that she was seeing the girl for the first time. Sasha was just furious that Johannes let himself touch Rebecca and mentally asked him to get his dirty hands off her shoulder. At that moment, Johannes turned towards Sasha and said that in any case, this child had a beautiful appearance, and asked the heroine if it was her first time in the imperial palace, and asked to which noble family she belonged. Then the girl curtsied as befitting her position and announced that she was thrilled to meet Rebecca and Johannes, then introduced herself. She begged herself to say something funny, then thought she should stop making such a cute face at the villain. Then Johannes smilingly informed that he had never heard her surname before, and perhaps this was indeed her first time in the imperial palace. After that, he wanted to ask what her father was doing, but Rebecca grudgingly told Johannes that he should stop asking about it. She then touched his shoulder and told His Highness that she had asked him many times before to show some restraint when meeting other women at official receptions. Then she added that His Majesty the Emperor would be distressed by such behavior on his part. But he seriously informed her that while he had not married her, he wanted to have fun at such meetings. Rebecca was clearly displeased, so she told His Highness that this was not acceptable. He, as if capitulating, spread his hands and agreed with her, informing her that he can't keep arguing when Rebecca makes that face, so he has to back off, especially today. And leaving the protagonist and Rebecca alone with the other aristocrats, informing them that he was on his way out. Then he winked at the other girl, who inquired about the reason for his leaving so early and told him that he had some business to attend to, and they would definitely see each other another time. Then the protagonist carefully examined Rebecca, around whom the aristocrats had already begun to whisper and spread rumors. She felt madly sorry for this girl, even though she was a villain, because the girl was truly beautiful and smart, but somehow she became a villain. And it's probably because she loves that womanizer too much. But suddenly her attention didn't go unnoticed, so Rebecca turned towards Sasha and looked at her carefully. At this time, Sasha was thinking that if Rebecca was her friend, she would try to save her from the Emperor by any means necessary. Then Rebecca smiled at the main character, and Poe asked if she heard the name correctly, then informed her that the girl was indeed insanely cute. Sasha was a little shocked and surprised at this reaction from Rebecca. After all, she was genuinely smiling at her and behaving quite nicely from the outside, and quite unlike the villain's behavior. She was surprised that Rebecca had suddenly decided to inquire about her life. Then the lady smiled and asked Sasha where her mansion was and sat down next to her. The heroine explained, rather embarrassed, that her father's mansion was far away from the imperial palace, but that absolutely no disdain reported that apparently it was incredibly difficult for the girl to get to this palace. Sasha only smiled at this concern and said that she had come with her friends, and afterwards added that, to tell the truth, it was only thanks to her friends that she had been able to attend such a party. But at the same moment, she hesitated, not understanding why she was behaving like this, because despite the fact that Rebecca treated her favorably, she should have avoided such things, not enjoyed this attention. But still, she gave herself permission not to think about her desire to avoid Rebecca for once. Then the other aristocrats smilingly informed her that Sasha was doing an insane amount for them and was an insanely proper lady. At this point, the protagonist, sadly looking at her reflection in the teacup, thought that she was madly ashamed to say it, but still admitted that her family does not have extensive connections in noble society. Because of this, she first timed a reception at the imperial palace. And she's trying her best, but it's not going so well. The other noblewomen looked at her excitedly and wondered what she was talking about, because she was insanely good at the reception and behaved decently. Then the other lady looked at her carefully and informed her that if Sasha wasn't really worthy of visiting the imperial palace, then Ava would never have asked her fiancé to get a separate invitation for her. At this point, Ava happily agreed and reassured the protagonist that everything was indeed fine so she wouldn't worry. Then the protagonist smiled at them and told them that their soothing words made her truly happy. But at that moment, Rebecca watching her was deep in thought. Then Sasha said that she was insanely scared to be among so many people, and that the imperial palace seemed like a place she didn't deserve. But suddenly her face contorted with shock when Rebecca informed her that from now on Sasha would have to get used to so many people and struggle with some discomfort. The protagonist was surprised enough, so she looked at Rebecca worriedly. But she smiled and told Sasha that she wanted to invite her to her tea party. And she added that if her memory didn't fail her, everyone else should have received a similar invitation by now. Then Ava, carefully looking at her, reported that they had indeed received them. So the mistress was absolutely not mistaken. Then Rebecca went on to explain that her tea party is only organized for noble daughters and for princesses. So if she attended it, she could quickly get used to the atmosphere of the palace. The protagonist excitedly did not understand what kind of situation had happened to her, so awkwardly informed that there was absolutely no guarantee that she could get a permanent invitation to the imperial palace. But then Rebecca leaned over to her and told her that only she could give out such invitations. She smiled and told Sasha that she would be glad to see her at her tea party. The girls around them were smiling and happy that everything had worked out so well, and it seemed that Lady Rebecca also liked the main character very much. The other girls were excitedly noticing that this was the first time they had ever seen Lady Rebecca invite someone out on her own. But the main character seemed absolutely not happy about it. She didn't realize what was going on and was in real shock. She did not know what she had done that deserved her favor, and she realized that she did not want to be associated with the villain. After all, then she would die in vain. But afterwards, she reflected that once the villainess showed the slightest interest in her, she was sure to ruin her relationship with the prince. But suddenly, Ava brought her out of her musings and told her that thanks to her help, Sasha had been able to get an invitation to the imperial palace, as well as meet Lady Rebecca. At this point, Sasha quickly realized what she was getting at, and so with a nod informed her that she would be sure to have dinner at Lady Ava's house tonight, as she had promised earlier. Da was insanely happy and said that she would make high-class macarons, which the protagonist madly loves. But she didn't pay much attention to her and looked at the guy who was behind her back. He gave her an insanely scrutinizing look, which was hard not to notice. Then she smiled and, surprised at his presence, asked the gentleman if he needed anything from her. But the man replied coldly that he wanted absolutely nothing and then turned around and left. Then the protagonist, looking at his trace, thought that probably someone with such appearance was among the main characters. But then she thought that when her time comes to leave, she will definitely find out, so nothing bad would happen. At that moment, Ava spoke and said that she had prepared a funny fairy tale book, so they should read it together. Sasha was very happy to hear that she liked her idea. As a result, in the evening, the main character, as promised, went to Lady Ava's estate and dressed up in a nightie. As soon as Lady Ava saw it, she immediately told the girl that it suited her perfectly, and it goes very well with her hair. The main character smiled and thanked her for the compliment and said that Lady Ava had prepared something like that for her, so she was very grateful. She calmly explained that it was definitely worth it to see her smile, and then asked her to come closer. She took out a box of macarons and asked her if she had chosen the right one, and if it was exactly what she liked. The main character assured her that it was her favorite, and it's insanely delicious. After that, putting the girl on her lap, she said that she was madly glad that she had asked her maids to buy them in advance, and asked what books Sasha wanted to read. Sasha, still lying on her lap, said that she wanted to read a little later, but now she wanted to spend a little more time with Ava just like that. She smiled happily and laughingly agreed with the protagonist. Then the protagonist thought, what is said that the wife of the third emperor has a rather peaceful character, so many people consider her a very lenient person. The things she no longer uses are given to her maids, and she also plays the violin for her parents every night. For aristocrats, the girl is insanely modest, and in the original novel, she becomes close friends with the main character because they both hate boring social gatherings. Then munching on macaroons, Sasha wondered that at the end of the story, Ava had become a famous musician and played the violin for the heroine. And she wondered if she could trace the story back to that point. She was distracted by Ava, who asked the protagonist why her hair was so smooth. She said that she was willing to bet that she had never touched something so soft before. The protagonist was surprised, but afterwards smiled brightly at such a compliment and thanked her for it. And then she remembered that recently she even got the nickname of the aristocrat's pet, simply because since some time, having conversation while stroking her hair has become one of the ways to have a good time. So the protagonist quite often feels like a cat or a dog, but she can't help it if she wants to adapt. Sasha is also given exquisite desserts, gold, silver, and the rest. But all of this will happen until the main character of this novella shows up. And then Sasha will definitely support her, so until then, she just needs to relax and remain as a nice pet for these people. That way she doesn't cause any harm, because the protagonist will become an empress. And by all appearances, that path should make her happy. But for some reason, her thoughts went straight back to Rebecca. Sasha realized that it was best for her to be on the heroine's side. But for some reason she didn't know, as soon as she saw Rebecca, she didn't want to leave her in that position. Then she sat down on the bed and asked Lady Ava what kind of person Miss Rebecca was. She was surprised at the question and explained that she was the only daughter of the Arcana family and a girl, who would become an empress in the future. Then Sasha smiled brightly and informed him that it was absolutely not what she wanted to know, and she was curious about what kind of person Lady Rebecca really was. Then she asked what Lady Ava herself thought of the lady. Hearing such a question, Lady Ava tensed up a lot and informed Sasha that she realized that the girl didn't know everything yet, but she still shouldn't talk about such things. Then the protagonist hugged her and told her that she was just curious to know what Lady Ava really thought of her, and afterwards asked her to tell her. Tam exhaled and realized that she wouldn't be able to quench Sasha's curiosity by silence alone, so she would have to tell. And then she sat the girl across from her and informed her that she would tell her what she wanted to know, but she must not tell it to anyone. The protagonist accordingly nodded and happily agreed. Then Ava began her story, and remembering Rebecca said that, to be honest, she was very afraid of her, because she had never seen a girl do the slightest thing wrong at a social gathering. And she does seem perfect, so she feels like she'll be very humiliated around her if she makes even one mistake in front of her. So she has to make special arrangements when she spends time with Rebecca over a cup of tea. The protagonist listened to this carefully and realized that the reason why Ava supported the main character of the novella in the original story was because of the fact that social gatherings would become strict if the demanding Rebecca became empress. Then Sasha asked what she would do if Rebecca became empress. But at that moment, Ava covered her mouth with her finger and told Sasha never to repeat those words unless you wanted to die suddenly. She was very surprised and tried to explain herself. But the next moment, Ava grabbed her by the shoulders and told her that she should listen to her carefully. Then, gazing at her face with complete seriousness, she said that there was no one worthy to be empress except Lady Rebecca. Then asked if Sasha knew of anyone who had as vast a domain of beauty and nobility as she did. Then added that Rebecca was a bit intimidating, but she got the approval that actually confirmed her candidacy, naming her the next empress. Then Sasha thought about the protagonist of the novella and realized that everyone really did think that way until this girl came along. And at this point, the emperor must leave his bride and fall in love with the main character. So Rebecca would be able to lead a happy life if things didn't happen just like that. Then the protagonist agreed with Eva and informed her that she would be careful from now on. And then, carefully looking at her face, asked the girl to change her expression, because now she looked quite frightening. Then Lady Ava awkwardly apologized for surprising her, but she asked Sasha to promise her that she wouldn't talk about such things next time. She smiled awkwardly and made that promise, and informed her that she would never talk about it no matter what. Then Lady Ava hugged her. Then the protagonist thought about what she should do, because no matter how much she thought about what had happened, she really felt sorry for Lady Rebecca. So she thought about whether to stand up for her honor. Eventually, the day of the tea party came, and the protagonist peered out the window. But suddenly, she was distracted by the voice of the other aristocrats, who turned to her and asked if she was the only one who had no fiancé yet. She confirmed their speculation. Then the other noblewomen started asking each other how old they were when they got engaged, and awkwardly informed that she was betrothed as early as 9 years old, like and most nobles. Then the other girl excitedly asked Sasha why such a sweet and beautiful lady like Sasha was not yet engaged. But then she looked at Sasha carefully and suggested that perhaps it was because Sasha was too nice. She pretended to be delighted by the compliment and pretended to be embarrassed. But the next moment something caught her attention and she gazed out the window at the view. Then she realized that, as one would expect from the mansion of the founder of this country, the garden alone took up a third of her estate's grounds. And gazing into all this beauty, it seemed literally incredible to Sasha that she had been invited to a place like this. But a friend among the aristocrats began a conversation that Lady Rebecca seemed to be a little late today, since it was already time to start. After that, they started whispering that the girl should come with the emperor, and Poe wondered if they were arguing again. The other noblewoman confirmed the speculation and said that whenever they were present, there was a conflict. Then a maid came into their room apologetically and announced that she had brought the lady tea and asked them to take their seats. One of the aristocrats looked excitedly at the maid and wondered if the organizer had not yet appeared, but she had already decided to bring tea. And so she wondered where Lady Rebecca was. The protagonist, who was closely watching it all, pondered whether it could really be possible that Lady Rebecca had a fight with her fiancé. After that, recalling them, she knew that Rebecca and the emperor had been on strained relations even before the novella's protagonist appeared, and the engagement was forced, and the characters of the two were completely different. Then Sasha grudgingly turned away and thought about the fact that even if things were completely different, she still doubted that anyone could put up with Johanna's character being so disgusting. At this time, the other noblewomen were chatting about how unfortunate it would be if Johannes did not show up, for they had hoped to see them together someday, and whispered about when the emperor's eyes would be on Lady Rebecca alone. And afterwards, they expressed their doubts as to whether this would be possible, for the emperor was known to be a free spirit from long ago. Sasha, listening to all this, was maddeningly displeased, wondering how the other girls could call it freedom, for it was more like the behavior on Johanne's part didn't make sense. Then she looked out the window, thinking that the more she thought about the emperor and Lady Rebecca's relationship, the angrier she started to get, and thought that His Highness was real trash. But suddenly her gaze was caught by a green-haired young man who had approached her at the banquet yesterday. Then the protagonist realized that she remembered him, and she abruptly left her seat. The other aristocrats asked where Sasha was going so quickly, but she smiled and said that she had to leave for a while and wished her a good time. Moving closer to the man, Sasha noted that he had a rather neat face that blended disgustingly with his glasses, and his eyes were the same color as his hair. So it was Ace Klein. But suddenly, unexpectedly, the man turned to her and looked at her intently. Then the protagonist realized that this man was a graduate of Milan Academy, the best school in the empire, and he graduated in just 2 years. So he was a gifted genius who, under the command of the emperor, supports the prince. And besides, he was the character who kills Rebecca in the original. The protagonist looked at him happily and said that her assumption was correct and wondered if he was the same man who had looked at her at the ball. Afterwards, she introduced herself and said she was thrilled to see him again, after which excitedly informed him that she came to the tea party because Rebecca sent her an invitation and Lady Rebecca really cares about her. So she reads Lady Rebecca as insanely kind. Afterwards, she looked around and wondered what the man was doing here alone. But the man, without letting her look back, blocked the passage with a book and informed her that peeping was not good at all, and advised the girl to go back to the others. Then Sasha, covering her smile with her hands, asked if she understood correctly that his name was Ace Klein. Then she realized that since this garden was guarded by the prince's aide, His Highness and Lady Rebecca were most likely there as well. Then Sasha, as if radiant with happiness, said that she had heard about the gentleman in front of her, and she was madly happy that they could finally meet in person, because the young man was insanely famous. After that, she asked if she understood correctly that the prince was now in the garden, and asked if he was not bored to be here alone. Then Sasha asked if she could stay with him for a while. He was silent. Then Sasha, smiling, realized that silence was for consent, and her plan had worked out. Then she thought about his phrase when he said that the girl should go back to the others, and realized that apparently the young man didn't know at all what she was known for in social circles. Then she thought that perhaps even a genius might not understand something, but suddenly glanced at the book he was considering. Sasha knew that the young man always carries a book with him, as it is supposed to a glorified intellectual from the palace, and then thought about whether this guy was interested in the main character in the original novel. Then I thought about the fact that in the original novel, the main character was madly loved by everyone. But Johanna suddenly appeared unexpectedly and informed Ace Klein that Rebecca's nagging was maddeningly tiresome. But suddenly he sharply noticed Sasha and looked at her in surprise, wondering if she was that cute little chick from the Imperial Palace. Sasha, as her position suggests, curtsied and greeted the second son of the Empire. Then the man asked if he remembered her name correctly, and the protagonist played back the surprise and delight that he remembered her name. He looked at her calmly and wondered why she was so surprised. After all, sooner or later she would come to the Imperial Palace again, so he should understand her name. Right after that, His Highness turned to Ace Klein and inquired about the time, and after he received the answer, he said that he would send a carriage to the Tartan Manor. Sasha was very surprised at this behavior, and afterwards thought that man was acting very childish because he treated her nicely, after complaining that he was insanely tired of his fiancé. Then Sasha smiled and informed him that she had absolutely no idea how she could thank him for such generosity, but he simply waved her off and told her that he would be happy to see everything with her tomorrow. The protagonist curtsied a farewell, after which she excitedly turned around and went to find Rebecca and thought about how situations like this make her insanely nervous because she doesn't want to earn a headache. After all, life is her second chance, and luckily she's already figured out a way to live here quite comfortably. But that wasn't the point at all, so she walked deeper in and finally spotted Rebecca. So she walked closer to her, and when she saw her, she wondered why she cared so much about this girl's life and fate. She was surprised to see her, so she apologized that the tea party should have started already. She said that she would be back next, so she should leave first. But at that moment, Sasha took her hand in hers and told Rebecca that everything was fine, and she wouldn't tell anyone what had happened. Then Rebecca cried hard, saying that she had been taught various subjects since she was a child so that she could become a worthy princess. And they said she had to improve herself every single day. And she kept trying to be attractive to His Highness as a woman. She even told all her childhood to make sure Rebecca was the most worthy woman in the Empire, as well as the wisest. Thinking back on her life, she stated that to become a princess, she had to put in a lot of effort, and she couldn't even sleep well at night. She didn't know how she would make it through each day. She didn't know if she should go on and live like that. Then, with tears in her eyes, she confessed that even if her father understood her feelings, he still scolded. But even though it was difficult, she always chose only His Highness. But Johannes, as the protagonist has already noticed, is interested in other women. And the girl constantly has to make scandals because of this. He reads her not good enough. But at that moment, Sasha, who had crouched beside her on the fountain, informed her that this was not the case at all. And this is abnormal behavior on the part of the crown prince, and Rebecca doesn't have to accept it. And that is the reason why she is crying. Then she asked if Rebecca really loved the prince so much. She nodded, and then Sasha wondered why His Highness kept hurting Rebecca so much and making her so sad. But then, to Sasha's shock, Rebecca calmly informs her that Mr. Johannes wants to live a life of freedom until they get married, and Rebecca admits to herself that she is trying to get over it somehow. But her heart continues to ache. She feels like there's already just a hole in her soul. Then the protagonist took a good look at her and asked Rebecca if she could fill that hole. Rebecca was madly surprised and with tears in her eyes looked at her in surprise. She didn't understand what she would say to such a suggestion, but Sasha only smiled embarrassedly, realizing that she realized what would eventually happen and what awaited her, but she couldn't do anything about it because her heart yearned to help this girl. So no matter how this decision affects her future, she will never regret making it. Ever since Sasha proposed to Rebecca, her life has changed dramatically. She started living a really great life, and she was constantly being asked to syllable what shoes she liked, and what jewelry, and whether she wanted to choose a certain dress. So all I had to do was poke at the dress she liked, and the gemstones seemed to be perfect for her look. So she once asked for an amethyst ring. The man happily accepted the order and told a girl that he would pass it on, and then reminded Sasha that today, Mr. Ace Klein planned to pay a visit. The protagonist calmly said that she had already received the news, and then happily thought about what news this man would bring today. But suddenly she heard the servant's sentences, and then Rebecca entered the room, who looked around excitedly and, after giving herself a hand to take off her coat, inquired where Sasha was now. One of the servants informed her that before her arrival, Sasha had been in the parlor choosing a dress. As soon as Sasha heard that Rebecca had arrived, she happily ran to her and hugged her tightly, delighted at her arrival. Rebecca looked at the girl with embarrassment, apologized for being late, and said that His Highness had suddenly stopped talking to her. Sasha looked at her in surprise and wondered if they had quarreled. Then she calmly explained that everything was fine and they hadn't quarreled at all. Then she told Sasha that she was insanely nice, and it was not her who had waited for their meeting for a long time. Then the protagonist looked closely at Rebecca and noticed two servants standing behind her back with a large number of boxes and wondered what was hidden in them. Then Rebecca ordered to untie one of them, and Sasha saw the delicious pink macarons in front of her. And Rebecca explained what her favorite had taken. The main character was literally crying with happiness, and then Rebecca said that she didn't know which flavor she would like more, so she bought all that were available. After hearing this, Sasha happily ran up to her and hugged her tightly, thanking her for such a gift. Then, looking around the estate, the protagonist thought about the fact that for almost 2 years, Rebecca had been tending this garden on her own, and now Sasha had arrived at the Arkin family's estate to live with her at her request. But suddenly she saw Ace Klein and said hello to him and asked him what he was holding. He calmly explained that he had brought the books of his mistress and said that she could take a book of fairy tales if she wished. She clapped happily and said that she had wanted a new book for a long time. But then Ace Klein said that he would like to see Rebecca and asked where she was. But Sasha calmly explained that Rebecca was at the military training ground. Ace Klein was clearly surprised by such and looked closely at the main character and wondered what she was doing there and assumed she was practicing. After which Sasha informed that she was completely unaware of it. After which she happily added that she would insanely love to learn fencing just like Rebecca, and she's insanely cool. Ace Klein was madly surprised by this, but then Sasha grabbed his arm, told him they could wait for Rebecca together, and also to talk, and said she'd love to hear his stories. Then the protagonist, sitting and eating her macarons, asked if Rebecca and the prince had a fight and asked if Ace Klein knew anything about it. But he calmly informed her that it was not something the protagonist should know about. And he added grudgingly that the two maids had seen everything with their own eyes. But afterwards, he told me what had happened. The crown prince slapped his hand on the table and then said that Rebecca's behavior was insanely suspicious, and he wasn't going to tolerate it because she was his fiancée. Then he said that Rebecca had previously refused to go to the ball with him. Then he indignantly told the girl to look at his face because he could only drink a glass of tea because of excitement, and asked if Rebecca was doing this to him because she had grown cold. But Da only exhaled unhappily, and infuriated Prince report that any girl would fall in love with him, and it is because of Rebecca's whim that he pays no attention to anyone. But at that moment, Rebecca smiled and informed him that the prince must be much more careful what he said, and then informed His Highness that he had no right to speak to her in such a manner as that of Tona, and informed him that at the ball last night, he had touched the Count's daughter again. She asked the prince when he would wise up and told His Highness that he had indeed molested her, though she had warned him to be more careful. But he came closer to her and told her that it wasn't like that at all. But the girl looked at him unhappily and asked Johannes if there was any difference at all. The one grudgingly losing his head, as it is a headache, informed him that nothing would change from this conversation. As Rebecca walked away and turned around at the last moment, she told the principal that he should think about his behavior. His Highness tried to stop her, but she only slammed the door loudly, which closed behind him. From anger, His Highness threw a chair at the door, which closed, and told Ace Klein that he should only meet Rebecca, how such conflicts occur, because the girl simultaneously combines in herself both a holy maiden and destroying everything beast. Then he asked Ace Klein what he needed to do to get Rebecca back. But then he calmly informed her that he didn't think their relationship had been close before. Then the prince shouted indignantly at Ace Klein and informed him that tomorrow he was obliged to come to Arkin Manor and arrange a meeting with Rebecca. Then Sasha looked awkwardly at Ace Klein and asked, "Is it really true that Johannes made such a fuss for no apparent reason?" But Ace Klein, calmly sipping his tea, said that the prince had never done anything worthy of Lady Rebecca. Then Sasha noticed that the man had already set his cup aside and reported that she was insanely happy that Rebecca could stand up for herself in front of the prince, and wondering how that happened. Then Ace Klein calmly explained that Lady Rebecca always wins in their conflicts, and in my opinion, it was obvious from the beginning that Lady Rebecca would win. Sasha finished her macaroni contentedly and smiled, happy to hear such a statement from the young man. Then she pulled the box closer to him and asked him to try at least one of them. Rebecca had bought them yesterday. He looked at Sasha in surprise and asked if she had come this morning, but the girl said with a smile on her face that she had. Then she said again that this dessert was insanely delicious. But Ace Klein only looked at him unhappily and wondered how she could fit food in her, for all she did was eat all day long. but she gave him a disgruntled look and said she moved around a lot, so she doesn't get better. The man sensibly remarked and said that she sits on the couch all day and does nothing. Sasha remained silent and then lay on his knee and said that she had previously guessed that the young man had no sense of humor at all, and said that in fact she herself did not know why she did not get fat. And maybe it's just a peculiarity of her body. And even though she is idle and lies on the couch, she is still hungry all the time. Klein said that it was a good feature, but that lying on the couch for long periods of time was bad for her health, and advised her to walk or run in the morning or evening. And then he asked her if she liked the idea. But there literally as a cat smiled and said that any suggestion outside her blanket is not safe. The man calmly exhaled and looked at the protagonist, who was still lying on his legs, then hesitantly reached out and stroked her head. Then with a smile on his face, he informed her that Sasha was safe for now. But His Highness was already making some plans for her. Sasha thought that it was good enough that Ace Klein had come to the Imperial Palace and told her about His Highness, but she had a strange feeling. Still, she smiled and was glad that it was good enough that there were so many people around her who cared and thought about her. After all of this, Ace Klein remembered overhearing the dialogue that took place between Rebecca and Sasha. Rebecca cried out asking if everything that had happened was her fault, and said that her father had said earlier that she should understand everything, but she just couldn't take it all, and wondered how she could become empress, then said that her father had never been in her shoes, and he would never understand her pain. Then Ace Klein thought of Rebecca van Arken, the beautiful educated daughter of an aristocrat, the perfect candidate for the role of empress. But the prince's heart does not belong to her, and despite that, she takes full responsibility, and slowly Rebecca just rots from the inside out. The girl was like a royal tree that lives for its unusual purpose, and even if Rebecca is tired, she must remain the prince's bride. She doesn't do it because of her love for the prince. She is simply doing her duty, and a life with the prince will bring her nothing but misery. Overhearing all of this, Ace Klein thought about the fact that he had come to deliver a message, but seemed to be completely out of time and suggested that he should come back tomorrow. But suddenly he was stopped by Sasha's voice, who turned to the girl and told her that she should calm down and said that she understood all her pain. Then she sat on her lap and asked her if she had said too much and told her that His Highness was too stupid and didn't realize how important the girl was to him. And it wasn't Rebecca's fault, so Sasha would always be on her side. She was still in hysterics and tears and started calling Sasha's name, but she just pressed closer to her and told her that she was there for her and would never leave her. She was still in hysterics and tears and started to call Sasha by name, but she only pressed closer to her and told her that she was by her side and would never leave her. Ace Klein scrutinized the whole picture and wondered if Sasha was just a pet of aristocrats and wondered if Lady Rebecca was her next target. Then he wondered if he had underestimated her, because he had previously thought that Sasha could only do nice things. But his presence did not go unnoticed by the protagonist, and she carefully shifted her gaze to the doors behind which Klein was hiding and looking at the whole picture. As he left, he admitted to himself that at some point Sasha had interested him. When he finished thinking, Lady Rebecca came into the room, and the first thing she asked was if Sasha had fallen asleep. Then seeing Sasha asleep, she asked what had happened. Ace Klein looked at her excitedly and wondered, isn't she supposed to be on the military parade ground right now? Looking over at the girl who was walking to her desk, the man wondered if the precious child of Arkin was learning fencing and wondered why she was doing it, and suggested that perhaps she was learning it for Sasha's sake. Perhaps it all had to do with the Crown Prince's behavior. But afterward, Rebecca gave him a displeased look and turned to him and called him by name, informing him that the man knew perfectly well that she was very busy. And after looking at him with all sternness and earnestness, repeated the question. Thoth, carefully looking at the girl, reported that it was quite rude not to answer the first time, then informed that the matter was that the prince wanted to meet her tomorrow. But she calmly refused and said that tomorrow she promised to see the play with Sasha. Ace Klein, still stroking the protagonist's head, informed her that it was the prince's order to meet. But Rebecca calmly explained that Sasha had been waiting for this performance for over 2 months. Then the man stroking Sasha's head said that in that case, nothing could be done. And then he put a pillow under the girl's head and, scrutinizing her, said that he would tell His Highness that Rebecca was insanely busy because of her work. But after rising from his seat, informed her that at least for the weekend, the girl would have to meet Prince Johannes and recommended that she think about herself. After which we are reminded that the girl is, after all, still engaged to His Highness. Rebecca, grudgingly looking at the paper in front of her, reported that Sasha had once told her that a wedding should make people happy. Ace Klein absolutely agreed with her words. Then Rebecca, still scrutinizing her papers and doing her work, asked if there was a man in this empire who was truly worthy of her. The man looked at her worriedly and asked what she meant, but she calmly informed him that he should leave. Rebecca continued her work then and smiling asked Sasha, why does she keep looking at her so intently? But the girl looked at her carefully and said that today Rebecca looked different from yesterday. She was surprised, and so she looked at the girl and asked what she meant. She smiled and said that Rebecca was even more beautiful than she was yesterday. There was madly embarrassed by such a thing and wondered why the girl was talking about something like that. Looking carefully at Rebecca in front of her, Sasha realized that the girl was indeed more beautiful day by day. But no one else would tell her that, namely that she is beautiful and sweet, because aristocrats would not dare to show real feeling. And Rebecca has never received praise from her family or teachers. Noble aristocrats hide their faces under masks, and they are afraid to make the mistake of revealing their true feelings. That's why everyone is delighted with the main character, because alone with her they can get angry, cry, and laugh. And this is possible only because she is their pet, and they do not know what she is really like, so they trust her easily. And it's only because of this quality that she's still alive. Rebecca looked carefully at Sasha and told her that they were going to play tomorrow. And afterwards, she suggested that they go for a walk on the streets and buy some shoes. But she excitedly replied that Rebecca had an insane amount of different shoes and asked how many pairs of shoes she already had. But she calmly informed her that she wanted to make a gift for her. Then she suggested we have dinner together and asked her what she wanted to eat. But Sasha looked her over carefully and informed her that she had to have lunch with her father tomorrow and suggested that she have dinner at home. The woman looked her over carefully and informed her that if she was planning to meet her father, there was nothing that could be done. But she smiled and said that they could go to an interesting show instead. But Rebecca's friend noticed the ring on Sasha's finger and asked who gave it to her. She happily said that the ring had been given to her by Lady Ava. Then the girl began to scrutinize the ring on her finger and thought that she had seen the girl long enough ago, and pondered that she would have to meet her and tell her everything she had learned about the prince. But suddenly in their room entered the butler, who apologized and went to Lady Rebecca and said that he had to give her some papers. Looking at Rebecca, the protagonist thought that the girl was very upset because of the prince, but since she was next to him, now Rebecca was fine. And to avoid meeting with such a scoundrel as His Highness, the protagonist does not intend to go to the imperial palace. After that, Sasha thought that it might be worth writing a letter to Ace Klein and asking him to contact her if the crown prince behaves strangely. But then the protagonist excitedly noticed that the piece of paper Rebecca pulled out was gold-colored, and apparently it sent an invitation to the imperial palace. Ray Bestier smiled happily and announced that they were invited to a party, and Poe asked if she wanted to go with her. She looked at the invitation and clearly understood that she didn't want to go there, but it couldn't be helped since the invitation had been sent. Seeing the displeased face, Rebecca laughed and said that this time the party should be really fun. But Sasha shook her head and said that she didn't want to go there because His Highness would again pretend not to cheat on the girl. But Rebecca calmly explained that she thought the crown prince wasn't coming, so it wasn't worth missing out on an interesting event because of him afterward. Then she said, "They say the second Prince Pain is coming back." The protagonist was very surprised to hear about this because she knew that Prince Pain was second in line to the throne. The best knight, but the most unhappy prince. And the protagonist was sure that the readers of the novel Atlantis Beloved were fascinated by this character the most, because he asked the king not to consider him a son, but to consider him a knight, and as a knight, he spent most of his life on the battlefield. And the crown prince and the whole royal family just laughed at him and called him reckless, and even the servants thought the prince was cursed, so they ignored him. The main character was sad to note that even Pain's name literally translated as pain, so the author was very cruel when writing this character. Then Rebecca smiled and asked if Sasha didn't want to know what kind of man the prince was, then informed her that if the girl didn't see him now, he might not be able to come again, so she just had to go with her. Then Sasha covers her face with a pillow and informed her that Crown Prince Johannes will be there. Eating Prince is a jerk, and she doesn't want to see him. But the girl told her to calm down. Then the protagonist thought about how she really shouldn't miss Pain's homecoming party because of that selfie. So looking into Rebecca's smiling face, she announced that she was going after all. Tam was satisfied with this answer, So she handed the invitation letter to her servant and asked him to contact the beauty parlor and to warn him that they were going to go to a ball the other day, so they should prepare the best dress. The latter agreed, and after bowing out, left. The protagonist sadly thought that, of course, her curiosity to see Pain was boundless. But she also had other reasons to send her there, and she was insanely glad that she could remember that after all. Because at Pain's homecoming party, the original heroine will make her first appearance. Although Lilis was an aristocrat, but her loving parents brought up the girl crazy good-natured. So if you believe the author, the most charming feature of Lilis was her character. So the girl found herself at the ball and thought about the fact that she couldn't understand why she thought this behavior of Lilis so strange. Because how can such a kind girl fall in love with a man who already has a fiancé? But suddenly Rebecca took her out of her thoughts and came up to her and apologized for scaring her. But Sasha was not frightened at all and was madly happy about the return of the lady. After that, Rebecca handed her a glass and advised her to try this delicious drink. Looking at Rebecca's face, which was literally shining and smiling, the protagonist thought that Lilis was able to fall in love with a man who was already engaged and thus made her Rebecca suffer. So she's absolutely not kind. In the end, Sasha drank what Rebecca offered her and exhaled sharply. Rebecca said that the drink tasted good and asked what Sasha thought of it. She agreed with her opinion, but said that the degree was a bit high in this drink. And afterward, I thought about how she's actually insanely nervous and completely unable to drink. After all, because of her appearance, there were a lot of episodes that were not in the original. Finally, footsteps sounded and Sasha and Rebecca looked in surprise at the man who entered. It was Crown Prince Johannes, who called Lady Baku by name. Then Sasha and Rebecca bowed and curtsied before him and greeted His Highness Crown Prince Johannes. Then the hereditary press unhappily and with disdain looked around. That next to his fiancé is the protagonist. And Sasha herself thought about the fact that if a look could kill, she would already be dead. But on her defense was Rebecca, who stepped in front of the girl and blocked her with herself, turned to the prince and asked if Sasha had made some mistake and wondered why he was looking at her so harshly. The main character was insanely happy that Rebecca stepped in and saved her from this horrible man. And Johannes at this time did not know at all what to say to him. And so he muttered through his teeth that the king wished to speak to the girl, so he asked her to follow him. The woman grudgingly asked if His Majesty really wanted to meet with her, but he grudgingly informed her that that was the case. So he informed her that they had to go faster. Rebecca didn't trust him, so she looked at Ace Klein standing behind him and waited for him to nod in affirmation. She then exhaled and threw her shawl over the protagonist, informing Sasha that she would be back soon, after which she explained that it was quite chilly in this room, so the protagonist should wear this. She then approached the crown prince and told him that they were ready to go. He tried to say something to her, but she calmly informed him, without even looking at him, that he shouldn't talk to her. He awkwardly tried to explain himself to the girl again, but this time he was interrupted by Ace Klein, who told him that they should hurry up because His Majesty was waiting. This did not go unnoticed by the crown prince, who wondered if Klein was not on his side as well. The main character was watching all of this, and seeing this whole picture thought that she doesn't care about the original story, because she just wants to run away from here with Rebecca under the cover of night. But suddenly, Lady Ava suddenly came up to her. She hugged her and told Sasha that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. After that, she excitedly said that earlier she had written a lot of letters to the girl, but she did not reply to any of them, so she became very sad. But Sasha smiled and apologized for being busy, so she didn't answer. Lady Ava only said that keeping a pet in the same place was very unhealthy, so Rebecca was going too far. But smiling Sasha informed that she was voluntarily staying at Rebecca's house, so all was well. She looked excitedly at Ava and asked where everyone else was, because she wanted to see them and greet them too. But the latter awkwardly informed her that unfortunately, this was not the right time to meet with them, as another brilliant lady had joined them today. Then she looked around and saw that the gazes of literally all the people were pointing in only one direction, and apparently in a novella there was such a scene too. The main character immediately paid attention to the blonde, near which walked a huge number of men, and realized that this lady from the very beginning attracted the attention of absolutely everyone. Then she asked what her name was, but Lady Ava said that she thought she had heard her name, but could not remember it. Looking carefully at the girl that was literally shrouded in an ominous aura, Sasha realized that it was a blonde with green eyes, insanely similar to the description of the main character, but then fortunately exhaled and decided that the main character of this novel was more good-natured and disposable to herself. But suddenly, Lady Ava clapped her hands and said that she finally remembered the lady's name. Then she said that her name was Lilis. The protagonist immediately recalled the description from the novel. She had lustrous golden hair, clear eyes the color of summer greens, a delicate light blush on her face, and the girl was like an angel sent by God to earth. But she looked at the girl in front of her in shock and didn't understand how such a thing could be written about her in a novel. Lady Ava noticed her gaze and asked Sasha what had happened. And then she came up to Sasha and said with a smile that Lady Lilis seemed to like her and wondered if there was anyone in the world who might not like her. She laughed with a fake smile on her face, still shocked by what had happened, and thought that it wasn't the most important thing now, because Roman had probably changed because of her interference. But it only affected the relationship between Rebecca and the prince, but it didn't touch Lady Lilis at all, so I didn't see how it could have happened. But suddenly they announced the arrival of His Highness, the second prince. Sasha wondered if Lady Lilis had admired Pain from the beginning, because he was a war hero. But then she noticed the reaction of Lilis herself to the young man who had entered. But she smiled like a wicked, fatal lady, and the protagonist, in shock watching this, did not understand. Is it really the same heroine? Because she was similar in appearance, but completely different in character, because how Lilis can be so lustful, look, and what happened to the very sweet and innocent protagonist. Then Sasha thought that maybe someone once reborn in her body just like she did. And indeed, there is a story where a possessed heroine meets another possessed hero, which leads to a change in the plot. And maybe that's the reason for the change. But suddenly they heard a commotion among the aristocrats, and Sasha excitedly turned to Lady Ava and asked what was going on. So they both began to look at what had happened. And then they saw a girl crying. Then Lady Ava said that it seems that the fiancé of this young lady is now next to Lady Lilis, and that's why she is madly upset. Then Sasha asked Ava to wait a bit, and she wanted to come and see what was going on. At this time, Rebecca was talking to the emperor, who inquired of the girl that she had not been getting along well with the prince lately and wondered what was wrong. But she calmly told His Majesty that all was well, and only her incompetence had caused this misunderstanding. But His Majesty looked at the girl carefully and said that Johannes was his son, so he knew him better than anyone else. And Lady Rebecca had always been kind from childhood, so the prince could not disgust her for no reason. So he wondered if the prince had offended her in any way. But she assured him that everything was fine and he had nothing to worry about. The man only exhaled unhappily and said that apparently the girl did not want to discuss it with him, for it was he who had insisted that Lady Rebecca and his son should marry. She only apologized to His Majesty for the fact that he was worried, but he took her by the shoulder and told her that she had nothing to apologize to him, for it was he who should apologize, because he had done everything in his power to keep her with the prince. Then he said that his son needed a good companion. The girl bowed her head and informed him that she would be sure to remember his admonition. He smiled wickedly, then looked at Ace Klein and asked him to return to the party, as he wanted to say something to his future daughter-in-law in private. Ado agreed and went out. Leaving the door, he wondered what. It seemed their conversation would drag on for a long time. After all, the emperor would be asking Rebecca to take care of his son again, as she had always done. And ever since he had gotten worse, he had made a habit of calling people into his room and talking to them, after which he put his head on his hand and informed me that he was getting very tired of it all. But afterwards, he realized in shock what he had said and literally shuddered at his thoughts. After that, he looked around and saw that there were no people around. So he was relieved and scolded himself for such words. At this time, Sasha ran after the crying girl and realized that she urgently needed to see her, as only this girl could give her answers to her questions. At that moment, Ace Klein came up to Lady Ava and asked where Sasha was now. But she calmly informed him that Sasha seemed to be on the balcony, but he shouldn't go there now. But the one didn't listen at all, so he opened the door and caught the dialogue that was going on between the main character and the crying lady. She was sobbing, not understanding how her fiancé could do such a thing to her, because yesterday he was so tender and attentive to her. But Sasha stood by her side, supported her and comforted her, and told her that it didn't matter whether it was Lilis or her fiancé, because they were both guilty. So she said that maybe the girl was being asked to use this opportunity to cancel their engagement, because this man is completely unsuitable for her. She was still wiping her tears and said that she didn't know what to do. And then she looked at Sasha and thanked her for listening to her. Then she said that it was no wonder that everyone was talking about her kindness, but she smiled and said that she didn't need to thank her. After that, the aristocrat leaned over to Sasha and said that now she understood why everyone loved her, and so she said that she would like to invite Sasha to visit her. But suddenly she saw sharply that the glue had been standing there all this time and overheard. So shocked, she ran away. When they were alone, Ace Klein looked at Sasha and asked if the girl knew her, but she smiled and said that she didn't know her, and today was the first time they had talked to her. The one was insanely surprised that this was the first time they were talking and their dialogue was so lighthearted. But she looked at Ace Klein with a smile and said that it was because they all treated her as a pet. The guy looked at the protagonist in shock and realized that the girl considered herself a pet, but she didn't seem pathetic to him because her refusal to be proud and to please the nobility was her way of survival. And surely if she hadn't been acting as a pet, she would have been given in marriage to some elderly aristocrat long ago. But her resignation to fate is not quite in harmony with her actions. So he glanced at the pensive Sasha and wondered, was she unhappy that Rebecca had left her here alone? She smiled and wondered if Ace Klein had decided to feel sorry for her. And then she said that she thought the only person to feel sorry for now was himself. Pfaff was madly surprised then at the words and wondered what she meant. Sasha didn't bother to answer and held out her arms to him for a hug and motioned for him to come closer. And then she hugged him. As he hugged Sasha, he thought about the fact that all this time he had no feelings for the prince, because whatever he was doing, Ace Klein was just helping him and he only had to fulfill his duties. But at some point, he began to despise the prince. No matter what he did, his parents would still protect him, and no matter what he did, he would be forgiven and loved. And because of his simple origins, Klein's mother was always mocked and his father was always drinking, and the nobles despised Ace Klein because he had commoner blood in him. And that's when he first began to hate, though it had never happened before. He hugged Sasha tightly and thought about the fact that after he had told Sasha about his past, his feelings had finally changed. Some time passed, and suddenly Rebecca's voice came out and turned to Sasha, who was already quietly eating macaroons at the banquet, and the lady announced that it was time for them to leave. Rebecca and Ace Klein were next to Sasha then, and she calmly replied that they could go home in peace. At that time, the excited prince informed Rebecca that they should still talk, but she paid absolutely no attention to him. Then the protagonist turned to Ace Klein and smiled and told him that she was going to leave. He looked at her with a kind of sad look and wished her a pleasant journey. As they rode in the carriage, Rebecca noticed that Sasha was very sad for some reason and wondered if something had happened during her absence. But she just smiled calmly and she said that nothing had happened and that she was fine and that she was just tired. And I thought about the fact that the original story was completely changed because the crown prince didn't even notice Lily's eagerness to apologize to Rebecca, and looks like he's desperately trying to repair their relationship. Lilith was also not interested in the prince and talked only with pain. Remembering her face, Sasha realized that with her smile, Lilith is able to seduce a man who already has a bride. So without a doubt, she is dangerous, and anyone will realize that the protagonist of the novel is far from being an angel, as described in the novel. After all, in the original novels, the crown prince, Ace Klein, Pain, and the dragon were in love with her. But now two of them aren't interested in Lilis, and you could tell by their behavior at the party. She realized that Ace Klein, that wasn't the worst part. After all, he had a minor role in the novel. In the end, he gave up Lilis for his master. But she really cared about the crown prince who did this because she was a crazy fan of their couple, and she was going to use all her ways to keep the prince together with Lady Lilis. Afterwards, Sasha chewed on her fingers and thought that it was a good thing that at least Pain and Lady Lilis had already met. And things were going well in that respect. But she didn't know what the dragon would do. After all, he is one of the leading male characters, and for the love of the heroine, he swore to be the guardian of Atlanta, and unlike other heroes, the fate of an entire country depended on him. And if because of her meddling, this key episode is also changed, something terrible could happen. She literally swore to herself that all she wanted was for Lilis and the crown prince to be together to help Rebecca avoid a horrible fate. Her nervousness obviously didn't go unnoticed by Rebecca, who looked at her worriedly and wondered what was wrong. She was completely preoccupied with her own thoughts and didn't notice it. She thought about the fact that the butterfly effect had happened, and her actions had changed the plot, and it was all because of her, and she shouldn't have gotten involved. But suddenly I was taken by the hand by Rebecca, who saw her finger red with blood and informed the girl that it was a terrible habit. Then smiling, she added that they should rest, after which she said that she had noticed Sasha sometimes bites her fingers when she's in a bad mood or when she wakes up suddenly in the night. But after swinging her arms and telling Sasha that she didn't blame her at all, she hugged him tightly and told him that in such a crazy world, it would be quite strange to remain unperturbed. So she calmed him down and said that they would go home, eat something delicious, and then forget about all the bad things. And she asked what Sasha wanted to eat. And then she added that they had macarons at the party, and she probably doesn't want them anymore. So they can have a creamy caramel-flavored tiramisu. Sasha literally cried, mentally apologizing to Rebecca for thinking such a thing in front of her. After all, if she hadn't intervened, she would have been tricked by that scumbag prince, and then the girl thought that she wouldn't regret her intervention in the affair anymore, because she didn't regret saving Rebecca. Then she turned to Lady Rebecca and inquired if she could meet one person. But she calmly put her head on her shoulder and said that she could see anyone if she wanted to. Sasha thought with tears in her eyes that for Rebecca's sake, she was ready to tear the whole affair to shreds because she should be happy. At this time, a pack of angry wolves were being dealt with by a dragon who was contemplating the fact that he was getting bored. After all, he used to just like to watch, wasn't it? And it was also fun to kill the wolves who found themselves tricked by his appearance. But more and more often he thought about wanting to travel and decided that anywhere would be much better than here now anyway. At this time, the protagonist was reading a dossier about Lilis. The summary said that Lilis May grew up in a quiet backwoods area, which was inhabited by only 40 peasant families. And she was the only daughter of Baron and Baroness May. Her parents often took her with them, and they went together to communicate with the peasants. But suddenly her mother stopped leaving the house, and the main reason for the girl's visit to relatives is the desire to get medicine. Reading this achieved, the protagonist was surprised by such a reason for the arrival of the girl, and then thought that she absolutely did not remember that her mother is sick, but then she thought that most likely just did not finish reading to this point, or forgot about it. The next moment, a smiling servant turned his gaze upon her and inquired whether she had found the information she needed. The heroine smiled and thanked him for his help, and he, seeing such a happy protagonist, said that she should not smile so friendly to her subordinates, otherwise Rebecca might get jealous. And afterwards, she asked the man about her surprise that the information had been able to get so little and wondered, was it due to the fact that the girl was born in a rural area? He confirmed her guesses and said that the area was small and people were wary of outsiders. The protagonist thought that in principle is quite logical, because all rural areas can be isolated and much more dangerous than the big city. After that, the protagonist returned the dossier to the young man and said that he had mentioned that Lilis's mother was unwell and wondered if she was seriously ill. But he awkwardly said that he didn't have much information about it. Sasha reflected that she shouldn't have expected much, but it was still amazing that they had managed to find out at least something, since Lilis' homeland was very far from the capital. In the end, the coachman informed Lady Sasha that they had arrived at the Daisy restaurant. Then the protagonist thought that she could find out more information herself. Eventually, when she came out, the waitress informed the protagonist that her companion was already waiting for her and offered to escort her out. When Sasha approached, she smiled brightly and asked the person she was talking to if she liked the weather today. It was Lady Fox. After that, the protagonist noticed that the food they were served looked very tasty and Lily, and reported that as expected, the capital is a completely different level. The protagonist smiled brightly and said that she was madly glad that the girl liked her choice. She took a bite of the dish and was disappointed to think that there was not a single piece of meat in it. At that time, Lilis said that she had always been a vegetarian, so she was madly pleased that Lady Sasha had proposed to meet in this place, and said that she was madly pleased that she had enjoyed it. She looked at Lilis more seriously and thanked her for being able to respond to her hasty request to come here. But she calmly replied that she really wanted to be friends with her. Afterwards, she noted with embarrassment that she first noticed her back at that party, and the girl had seemed insanely cute. And afterwards, she literally glowingly reported that as soon as she heard what her name really was, she started to wonder because even her name sounded insanely cute. The main character was literally shocked, not understanding why Sasha was so kind to her. Then scrutinizing the girl's face, Sasha noticed that Lilis behaves completely differently than before in the palace. And now she looks more like an innocent sheep. The heroine gazed into the smiling Lilis and afterwards said that the girl reminded her of a blooming rose and she was irresistible and beautiful. Lilis thanked her and then told her that their estate is small and beautiful, so that most people in the capital don't even know its name. But she likes living there and they have fertile soil and also good weather, so their estate is famous for the most delicious strawberries. After which she smiled brightly after which she said that if she had the chance, she would like to treat her to a strawberry shortcake. The protagonist smiled brightly and announced that she'd really like to try that, and thought to herself that this Lilis definitely couldn't be the Lilis from the novel. The main character didn't understand why, despite inviting the girl to meet just to get information over dinner, she felt such kindness. The main character didn't understand where that Lilis, who literally licked herself at the sight of pain and had absolutely no idea what was going on, had gone. The next moment it was time to pay, and Lilis happily held out the money and told Sasha that they would pay for the meal. She waved her hands and said that she could not do that, because she had invited her. But Lilis smiled brightly and asked Sasha to let her do since she was madly eager to be friends with her. The protagonist looked at her awkwardly and wondered if she was rather uncomfortable hearing this, considering her true motives for inviting her to dinner. In the end, when they went outside, the protagonist thought about the fact that in the end, she never managed to find out anything. Lilis, meanwhile, was thinking that she didn't even realize that they would finish eating so quickly. Then she said that she often went to a coffee shop nearby and invited her to join her and eat together. The protagonist was overjoyed and thought about the fact that she had to eat first. But suddenly she flinched sharply at the realization that this was going nowhere. After all, if this went on like this, they'd be doing nothing but talking in the coffee shop the whole time. So when she looked at Lady Lilis carefully, she realized that if she wasn't the real heroine from the novel, she was clearly possessed by someone. So this way, if she knew the content of the novel, maybe Sasha could make her follow it. So she looked at her carefully and inquired if she knew Atlanta's lover. Ta looked at her carefully and wondered what she meant. The protagonist was quite surprised by this reaction and thought that the girl probably really didn't know about it, and maybe it meant that she was reborn or came from the future. Then she waved her hands and informed him that this was one Romanov and she could probably not know him. But suddenly she looked at Sasha with all seriousness and inquired, "Does the protagonist really mean the original story?"